Subjunctive Mood by Matt Hirchala, Kevin Carroll, Dominic Pellegrino, and Jake Johnson. What is a subjunctive? The subjunctive is a mood in Spanish. It's important to note that a mood is different than a tense. A subjunctive sentence has two clauses. These two clauses are joined by the word "que," which represents that in English. Some examples of subjunctive sentences is "I wish that our house was bigger," or "it's important that the plan goes well." The main clauses in these two sentences are "I wish" and "it's important." They are joined to the second clause by the word "that," which is "que" in Spanish. Subjunctive is different than the indicative. Subjunctive expresses uncertainties or hypothetical statements. It expresses attitudes or feelings towards a certain situation or event. Subjunctive sentences are often subjective. An example of a subjunctive sentence is, "I hope that the dog does not run away." The indicative deals with real, fact-based statements. It expresses real actions or events, usually objective statements. An example of the indicative is, "The dog has run away." The subjunctive is used in several scenarios. Wishes, emotions, impersonal expressions, recommendations, doubts or denial, or ojalá que, are different situations in which the subjunctive will be used.
Buenas noches. Here are 5 examples of the subjunctive in English. Number 1. If I were in your situation, I would not do that. Number 2. I advise that you complete the project on time. Number 3. It is important that you study every night to get a good grade. Number 4. It is essential that you eat balanced diet to stay healthy and recover from practice. Number 5. I could finish the meal if I were hungry. Here are 6 examples of the subjunctive in Spanish. Number 1. Deseo que mis maracas hagan mucho ruido. Number 2. Estoy triste que mi lucha libre terminó por mi lesión en el hombro. Número 3. Es evidente que tengo muchos apoyos para este proyecto. Número 4. Te recomiendo que cargues tu celular antes de que se quede sin batería. Número 5. No dudo que la señora Mulligan disfruta sus dulces colombianos. Número 6. Ojalá que la señora Mulligan tenga una exitosa cirugía de corazón. Gracias y Dios te bendiga. Buenas noches. Here's an explanation of the 6 examples of the subjunctive in Spanish that I just presented. Número 1. Deseo que mis maracas hagan mucho ruido. Deseo is part of the main clause, and que, as with all of these examples, is the connector, and mis maracas hagan mucho ruido is the subordinate clause, with hagan, which you can see in the green, is the verb. Estoy triste is, again, the main clause, que returns as the connector, and mi lucha libre termino por mi lesión en el hombro is the subordinate clause with termino in green being the verb. Number 3. Es evidente is the main clause with que again being the connector, tengo being the verb, and muchos apoyos para este proyecto, including tengo after the que, is the subordinate clause. Te recomiendo is the main clause in the fourth sentence, and que, again, is the connector with cargues tu celular antes de que se quede sin batería being subordinate clause with this sentence having cargues as the verb. For number 5, no dudo is the main clause with que being the connector in La Señora Mulligan disfruta sus dulces colombianos being the subordinate clause in disfruta being the verb. Ojalá is the main clause which connects via que to La Señora Mulligan tenga una exitosa cirugía de corazón being the subordinate clause, and tenga in green is the verb.
Buenos dias. Every subjunctive sentence includes a verb. In order to convert these verbs into subjunctive form, you must change their endings to their opposite endings. Verbs ending in AR must change to E endings, and verbs ending in ER and IR must change to A endings. As we can see here from the example, some ER verbs, the stems yo changes to a, tu changes to as, usted, él, and ella change to a, nosotros changes to amos, vosotros changes to ais, and ustedes, ellas, and ellos changes to an. And for the ER and IR verbs, yo changes to a, tu changes to es, usted, él, and ella change to e, nosotros changes to emos, vosotros changes to es, and ustedes, ellos, and ellas changes to en. Here we have a list of present subjunctive irregulars. These 5 verbs that are dar, which means to give, estar, which means to have, ir, which means to go, saber, which means to know, and ser, which means to be, are all irregulars in the present subjunctive form. An example of the changes made to these irregular verbs in the present tense is ser. Ser changes to yo. In the yo form, ser changes to sea, tu form changes to seas, usted form changes to se, nosotros changes to seamos, vosotros changes to seais, and ustedes changes to seon. Saber is another example. In the yo form changes to sepa, in the tu form changes to sepas, in the usted form changes to sepa, in the nosotros form changes to sepamos, in the vosotros form changes to sepais, and in the ustedes form changes to sepan. Here are a list of AR and ER stem changing verbs. One of the examples we have here is volver, which in the yo form changes to vuelva, in the tu form changes to vuelvas, in the usted form changes to vuelva, nosotros form changes to volvamos, in the vosotros form changes to volvais, and in the ustedes form changes to vuelvan. Note that these verbs do not change to a stem changer in the nosotros and vosotros form because they're ER and IR, or AR and ER verbs. Here we have the IR stem changing verbs that change the nosotros and vosotros forms, unlike the AR and ER verbs that we just saw. And an example of this is sentir, which in the yo form changes to sienta, in the tu form changes to sientas, in the usted form changes to sienta, in the nosotros form changes to sentamos, in the vosotros form changes to sientes, and the ustedes form changes to sientan.
How to form a subjunctive. You start at the yo form drop the O ending and replace it with the subjunctive ending for AR, ER, and IR verbs. You drop the opposite ending and look for irregulars. Car, gar, and zar. In order to maintain the C, G, and Z sounds, verb endings in car, gar, and zar have a spelling change in every form of the present subjunctive. An example of this would be necesito que consigas estas pastillas en la farmacia, which means I need you to get the pills from the pharmacy. The subjunctive mood with present tense irregular yo form verbs. Verbs with irregular yo forms show the same irregularity in all forms of the present subjunctive. An example of this would be es mejor que oiga al maestro en la clase de español, which means it is best to listen to the teacher in Spanish class.